We good? All right. Hey, sorry about that, folks. Welcome to the Unreal Engine live stream. I'm your host, Amanda Bott. We also have Jordan Walker, lead artist, Anton Migulko, senior technical artist, and Tim Slager, other community manager. So thank you all very much for joining us today.
Sure.
And we're excited to hear, you want to talk a bit about what you're going to cover
Yeah,
today?
so we'll talk about lighting in general inside of Unreal Engine. We'll use lighting from Paragon and from Fortnite as examples. Paragon being a good example of like static bake lighting, and Fortnite as an example of real-time dynamic lighting.
All right, great.
Well, that pretty much is.
What he said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so feel free to dive in.
Sure. So we'll start with some examples from lighting that we used in Paragon. And this mirrors what we put into the marketplace with the sample content. So basically, lighting in Paragon uses static lighting. We have a directional light paired with a skylight in the map. And the skylight uses like an HDRI that we provide for the map. We have, going back to our directional light, we use one cascade. It's 6,000 units out for that dynamic lighting. And so basically, like if we hop in here, this probably shows a better example. So our directional light has this dynamic cascade, which allows us to have dynamic shadows for objects near to the camera. We disable that on lower platforms so that they can run a little bit faster.
Okay.
We also utilize contact shadows for this directional light. When we're setting up the map, we tend to work in a smaller map because the level's being built. We'll have sort of a couple meshes placed in the smaller map where we iterate on our lighting. I think Anton could probably speak to that a little bit.
Well, yeah, in most of cases we just got smaller maps, but sometimes it's already working and we just sometimes just playing around with modification of existing lighting setting where you already know values and numbers and you just trying to tweak colors and some other things. As Jordan mentioned, like good of think of using stationary light. It gives us good GI on difference of totally dynamic light.
Yep.
And that make lighting and colors more believable and nice. What makes pretty much things realistic. So usually we're trying to make things sort of close to real first and then adjust things for the post process to make this extra drama in color correction. This makes us less worried less about that some parts of lighting will probably be broken or too bright or something will be incorrect. For instance, our directional light mostly for the daytime is 314, magical number pi. Works great for most of cases. As for the skylight, it really depends from your environment and what you need to play. Sometimes we're making it pretty bright because we have to overcompensate it in dark areas. When you're making game for dense multiplayer experience, you really have to worry about how every aspect of game will play, so you can see every character. And as well, special effects may affect things like eye adaptation or bloom, so we have to be really careful about making things bright enough to see everything, and then not overuse post-process to make things too bloomy or have too many lens layers, which can make not really nice experience while you're playing.
Yeah, so one thing we would do is we had a blueprint where we would place a character in that blueprint, a few effects that were used in the game, and whenever we're working on lighting, we're sort of moving that blueprint throughout the map. And that just gives us an indication of, as you're lighting your level, no matter what game you're building, you sort of can see how it affects your VFX in the level, your characters, and we'll do that on any game that we're building here, just so that we're making sure that we're lighting the level nicely, as well as the objects that show up, during like gameplay or whatever. So going back to the, like our setup a little bit, we use a stationary directional light that allows us to have like nice specular and shadows. And it's the only stationary light we use in the map for Paragon just to save memory. anytime you start adding additional stationary lights, we have to bake out other light map channels to support that. And so for Paragon, we made that choice just so that we could save on memory. Our skylight that we used was also static. This allowed us to basically just save some performance. You know, if you basically have to look at the trade-offs for your game in terms of, do you want really high quality skylight and use a stationary skylight and you can change it, you know, at runtime, or do you want to have a static one where you sort of bake some of the information in, but you can save on some frame time?
Yeah, it needs a bit of practice in the beginning because there'll be some small difference with stationary skylight and static skylight. But thanks to new volumetric light maps, you would have pretty much identical quality in shadow and ambient areas, so your characters will look really nice.
Yeah.
Comparing to what you maybe had in older versions of the engine.
Yep. Specifically for the games like Fortnite and for Paragon, we would take a cube map that we would generate from the level, and then we would hand paint some of that in Photoshop so that we could tweak, like, you know, paint out the sun in the cube map so that you don't have this really bright spot in your reflection, because you'll get that from your directional light, and also just to paint some details that will help, like, accentuate the lighting.
Is that common? Is that something that happens a lot?
Yes, because if you get a cube map from a photo, it'll have the sun in there, and you don't really want that because, like I said, the directional light will account for your sun reflection. And, you know, we just have a tendency to want to have artistic control over the lighting in the level, so we'll just bring it into Photoshop and combine cube maps or, you know, paint by hand.
Is that something you'll do yourself, or you'll have maybe an artist do?
It's usually whoever's handling the lighting. Okay. So on
Yep.
Paragon, sometimes it'd be Anton, sometimes it'd be myself. On Fortnite, we've had tech artists do it. We've had, you know, lighting artists do it. So it just depends on who's doing the work on the lighting. Yep.
Well, for case of Paragon, for one of sets, we actually had painted sunlight with really high value for sun area, about I think like 8 stops. Yep. I painted in Photoshop, and it's actually one way to set up things. You make your skylight totally dynamic. You add some chrome ball in a level, so you see where's your sun on reflections, and then you can match your sunlight to this area. But it usually takes some time to find really good angle. Like problem with like game like Paragon, which are multiplayer, you have to make all areas looking nice. You can't really cheat like in single player game when you can just preload some parts of the map. So we find some good angle. Like Fortnite is different animal,
It has like a dynamic sun, but it also, you sort of have to have a cube map that works for the entire map. And so, you know, once we tweak that directional light and tweak our skylight, we'll move on to tweaking like our exponential height fog. So we'll throw the fog in there, and we'll in Paragon, we used where you can provide a cube map, an HDRI cube map for the fog color as well. And we'll use our skybox as a start for that, but then we'll start to sort of like paint out some of the brighter areas and some of the details so that it feels more like fog color. It's like you want this balance between it feeling like a natural fog color and also something that blends nicely into the skybox, so that as it applies more to the mountains in the distance, they feel like they're sort of blending into the sky.
And it feels natural.
Yes, and the good thing about it is you can really cheat actually like how fog looks on lower part of your scene. If you go maybe somewhere next to like more open areas, you can paint. Can you look on the left maybe? Yeah, like there. So go lower. So you can actually paint on your because it's cube map. You can paint lower part of your cube map different color. You can make it maybe like color you really want to have fog lead, and it will then look really close to what you're really trying to achieve. And you can always then use local multiplayer to adjust brightness or color globally. But it's really flexible system which makes your sky sort of like naturally projected onto all objects.
Yep. We also, in Paragon, in the beginning, we had been using light shaft or bloom on the directional light. But since then, we've gotten this volumetrics that are on the height fog. So we don't use the light shaft bloom as much anymore. In Fortnite, we have a tendency to use both just to get like a slightly stylized look. But for a realistic scene, just using the volumetrics and the height fog has a tendency to look really natural. And to give us a little bit more control over that, what we would do is tweak the fog for the entire scene on a level that feels, it's sort of like the minimum amount of fog that we're happy with. And then we built these blueprints in the level that allow us to tweak the volumetric fog per area. So here you can see I have this sort of like invisible box selected. What that box allows us to do is inject fog into this area. And so to do that, you basically have a box static mesh. You create a material where I think the material domain is volumetrics. And then we made a blueprint where we just pipe in a bunch of values into that material. And what it allows us to do is like tweak the fog per area. And so we were able to place volumes in areas that we feel like should be damp or more spooky, and tweak the fog per area using this blueprint.
And since it's volumetric, you still can see it as outside as inside the volume, and you can really lower it down and have really nice like volume fog scattering only above the water or ground.
Yep.
So it's really flexible technology.
We also did this little trick where we do 2 texture lookups into this fog material, where we sort of have a noise panning one diagonal direction and another noise panning another diagonal direction, and then combine them to make it look like there's this sort of like volumetric noise inside the volume. And that helps just keep it from looking too uniform in density. And we have some controls inside the volume that allow us to tweak, how much contrast that noise has. We can also change the texture, although I don't think we ever did. Just something that helps us, sort of have some control over this. We also have a bit of emissive control in here, where if we wanted to like shift the color in an area, we could do that using this emissive color of the fog. So here you can add like a little bit of red or like pink to an area. And so we would balance that between changing the albedo color of the fog, which gets fully lit, or changing this emissive color.
That looks really cool.
It let us add a bit of like art direction to these areas.
Does that add a lot of weight to the frames, and does it?
Yeah, so it scales like I think it's like scalability.ini or whatever. There's a couple settings there that are already baked into the engine that allow it to determine how many steps like away from the camera and how many like samples sort of on the screen that it uses. We would turn it off on certain platforms. I don't think we shipped with it on base PS4, only because we were hitting 60 and we were supporting like just combinations of other features. It's one of those things where you sort of look at your game that you're shipping and sort of balance out what's important to that game.
Right.
And you could just turn it on and off. But it certainly does have a cost to it, and those volumes that define that fog, they have a cost to them as well. So the more volumes you have that are writing to fog, the more there will be a cost per volume. So there's sort of 2 costs there.
Is that something that you have to tend to fight for to keep in the game in sometimes? And
well, considering, so on Paragon and on Fortnite, the tech artists are sort of the group that will put these features in, as well as have to maintain the frame rate. So we're sort of balancing that ourselves and making that trade-off. It's a matter of, we'll do profile GPU, see where our cost is going, and sort of say like, yeah, this thing's really important to the look. Let's try to keep it. Some things may be super subtle, and it's just not worth keeping.
right.
But like I said, I mean, it depends on the game, and it depends on, sort of the look that you're going for. So another thing that we had to consider in terms of like performance and lighting the map is, we have this one directional light in the map that's stationary, but in the static skylight, but that doesn't get us all the lighting work that we need done. We had a lot of areas that are underneath the canopy, and this happens in sort of any game really, where you'll have a directional light that's doing a bit of, there's some GI that's happening, bouncing that around, but it's not bright enough. And so we would have to go through the level and place, static point lights or static spotlights just to like accentuate that bounce.
Right.
And even before, now we support evaluating evaluating the skylight at a really high detail. So if you have like a really small detail in your skylight, that'll cast pretty accurate light. That didn't used to be the case. And so before we would have static directional lights, like multiple ones in the map saying
All over
like,
the place.
yeah, sort of saying like, let's boost the blue coming from above, or let's add a bit of orange coming from the sunlight, but it's not quite sunlight. It's sort of like light scattering through the air around the sun.
Faking, kind of.
Yeah.
Fake
Well,
it
it's,
till you make
it's
it.
still the simplest way really to control it sometimes. We have directional lighting on the skylight, but you really have to be accurate about your texture brightness and how it's physically correct. Because render itself physically correct, you have to really care about it to match physically correct values, which in game reality is sometimes complicated.
Yeah.
So art of lighting for games has always been a lot of cheating, being super flexible and find solutions.
Yeah. So, once we sort of have that lighting sort of established and we have our fog established, we have to set up the scene to support real-time reflections. And so, that's done through sphere reflection capture actors, just to give people a sense of like how many we had to have in the level. This map had 47 in it. So here you can sort of see these spheres that define the reflection captures. Around 47 or 50 was our like hard limit because we had shipped, the previous maps for Paragon, and the memory used by reflections isn't streaming. So it's sort of this like block of memory you always have to deal with. And we've sort of like had optimized our game with like all the memory that was used. So whenever updating the map, it's like, okay, we're not going to use any more than that. So we had to get creative with where we placed them. But a good mindset to use when placing reflection capture actors is to sort of look at your space. Let's see if we can find a really big one. What you do is you sort of look at your space, and you can see how this is like a massive bowl for the play space. We'll sort of place like one larger reflection capture actor for this area, and then we'll start going down into smaller areas like this big area here. We would put a large reflection capture actor here, and then sort of like increment down smaller, because the way the system works is smaller reflections will draw over top of bigger reflections. So you sort of build a hierarchy where you say like, here's a really big one that gives me like a background or a backup reflection. And then you sort of like say, this is the next biggest area. And then you drill down into like, we'll have maybe like 2 in here.
And you have to be quite careful to not really overdo it. It's usually just place it in important places, try to be as minimal as possible, because if you have too many, you may have some really strange reflection leaks which come from other areas. So what was kind of good here, we got like areas which are easy to control, like the jungle spots, where we're trying to put them in the center of every important area, and then only if we have problems in some spots, we add in the smaller radius lights.
Yeah, so when you go to tweak them, one thing that's useful to do is switch to reflections only, and then turn off screen space reflections under lighting features, because screen space reflections just mirrors the mirror, which is just gets confusing to see. And you basically, go through your map and sort of evaluate like, does this reflection look proper for this area? You sort of look around and say like, okay, there's this canopy and it's open to the sky. Yeah, that feels appropriate here. Like Anton said, you try to dig around through your map where you'll find a cubby that's supposed to be dark and there may be light leaking in from the reflection, and you try to, cover those spots up with new reflection captures.
Or if you want to just go for a pure chrome look.
Sure.
Yeah.
Switch all your materials
It's
to
beautiful.
reflective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shiny.
Very shiny.
So, we sort of like set up all this lighting, we set up our fog, get our reflections going, and then sort of the last step to like the creative process for lighting is digging through our sort of setting up our post-process for the scene. On Paragon and for Fortnite, and pretty much any game I look at in general, I try to organize post-process into multiple volumes. We'll sort of set up a volume that's like, here's the base quality settings for the project. So that's where we'll set up like our ambient occlusion settings, our depth of field settings, all those sort of like baselines. And then we'll make another volume that's like for Paragon, for example, we had to do some outlines for characters and some things that were done through post-process materials. We'll make a volume that does just that.
Okay.
And then we make a volume that's for the level that says like, here's the general color grading for the level. This is sort of like the dark levels, the light levels, sort of the color tint that we want. Let's see. Yeah, so here's the settings from our like, one for the level. It's where we sort of set our basic, white balance, our saturation, contrast, all that stuff. And then once we define that for the whole level, we'll go in and make volumes for specific areas. The reason being, you don't want to start with a specific area because if you can make one large volume that takes care of like most of it, that's sort of, you only want to do as little work as possible,
Right.
because it gets hard to tweak later on. So it's similar to the reflections where you start really big and then you drill down in areas that you're not happy with. So in this map, for example, we would have, we had the one big volume for the look, and then we had one for each side. Because one side was like white marble and green grass, and the other side was like this like dark granite with orange grass and like fall leaves.
So do you ever get into a world where you make these more granular changes and then something changes that you have to redo everything on the global scale where, you affect that global volume and you're like, now this really screwed up all of my column micro volumes?
Yeah, I mean, it happens. We try to do a thing where we only modify settings that are important to that area. So in this jungle side, we adjust the saturation, contrast, gamma, temperature, but we don't really touch a whole lot. Like we don't mess with the midtones here. Our shadows, we just change where we're blending in. Our shadow changes. That way, if we do have to go fix up things, we don't have to touch like literally everything.
Right.
And we give those like proper priorities because, post-process volumes have like sort of a priority stack. So you can see like this one's a priority of 8. This one I have selected as
Off-screen.
high, which
Colors.
probably means I'm doing some system
Pull
thing
You
with
need to
it.
pull that on the screen for him.
Oh, okay. So let's see. Let's pull this over. So yeah, here you can see you have like post look, which is the look of the map, and then dawn and dusk, and then they have their own priorities there. This
So
is
it's
a
done in
little
a hierarchy.
Yeah, it's like this hierarchy. This is handled differently in Fortnite. We just have one large post process for the whole map because it's more about like time of day changes and stuff. Some of the other changes we went in and changed for this game specifically was, we give it a little bit of subtle chromatic aberration, but we worked with the engine team to add a new feature to chromatic aberration where it's called, it's like you can set a distance from the center of the screen to not do chromatic aberration. That's just because it was causing area around the crosshair to get like blurry and details that didn't look very nice when you're trying to pay attention to gameplay. So in your game, you can sort of say like, if I want a really cinematic look, don't touch it. If you want to like, have some gameplay clarity in the center, you can sort of push that value out under chromatic aberration.
Or it can be your artistic feature.
Sure, yeah, you can use it for gameplay features, right? Like you do something that affects the player's vision and you adjust the chromatic aberration.
So you're blurring out something, or
Yeah.
You can just blur
they're
edges.
drowning.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
You still keep center clean, but
Yeah.
on edges you can go pretty heavy.
Another thing we try to do is, we support dynamic exposure, but that can be tricky because we have to consider lower end hardware when we are building these post-process volumes. And so on lower end hardware, we may turn off eye adaptation. And if we've built our lighting to support like really broad ranges of lighting and you turn off eye adaptation, it won't look very nice. It'll be too dark or it'll be too bright. So we sort of keep our like min brightness and max brightness on our exposure, to be like 0.35, 0.45. Those exact numbers aren't important. It's more about like making sure they're not super wide. That's the same for Fortnite and for Paragon. For Fortnite, we actually did a pass where we rebalanced all the lighting around having eye adaptation turned off, because if you run with post-process set to low, like lowest or whatever, it just turns it off. And we want to make sure that players can see, enough information about the game. Let's see. We also, to get sort of like this nice distance look to this lighting and the post, we enabled circle depth of field, and there's a setting in there where you can set like how blurry the pixels are and at a certain distance. So in this example of Paragon, we set the distance to be at 1 kilometer. The pixels will blur half a pixel. And so at a full kilometer, we'll blur, or at 2 kilometers, we'll blur like a full pixel. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it sort of takes the edge off of these mountains in the distance. If that's disabled, it's probably not going to come through on the stream. But basically, if that's disabled, these details just get too razor sharp, and it doesn't feel realistic. In reality, you'll get this where light is bouncing off of the mountains and sort of like scattering through air particles a little bit and fog, and it just blurs it a little bit before it gets to your eye.
And it helps anyway to make things kind of like become a bit less detailed with the distance, so you kind of feel progression of space a bit better.
Yeah.
So it's really important.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about, we had a few different lighting scenarios we set up inside of Paragon. We had like a winter version of the map.
Yep.
So like, how was that different from, the default lighting setup?
Well, because we have to support 60 FPS, and sometimes given some new content, it was kind of tricky thing to really make it run with really good performance. So it was our first test to make total static lighting for Directional Light. Mm-hmm. And thanks to, again, to now new volumetric light maps, it was finally looking really, really decent. So even lighting was baked. It was still getting really nice lighting data on the characters. The only tricks thing, you would really have some time to make your Directional Light brighter than the stationary light, because you're losing all the specular, and you have to compensate it to keep the look. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, it was quite simple. It's just was important to have quite uniform density of the light maps. Otherwise, you would have quite big difference in resolution in some spots. But thanks to even previous map, we spent quite a big amount of time uniforming scale for the light maps. Can you probably change to light map density? This will be like really important things to know. It's buffer resolution. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so as you can see, it's not too high. There's nothing orange here. There's some spots which dynamic may be orange, but everything is sort of uniform scale, what makes all lighting data almost uniformly scaled. There's almost no chance to make it totally even, but you can get close enough, and you can be surprised you don't really have to have like super high res textures. You don't have to go to 1K resolution or higher. You can get really decent results sometimes with 100 and less, and it will work really, really good for small objects. You can go sometimes to 20 something, and it just will be as good as you'd expect. So it's really important part. It's affecting your memory as well, amount of and size of textures. So it's like part of optimization, and partly it's really affect your visuals. Probably can go back to normal lighting.
Yeah, we'd sort of do a pass where we would basically increase the resolution to get good quality, and then sort of go around the map and reduce quality as much as reduce resolution in areas that you couldn't perceive a quality loss, if that makes sense. Because basically we wanted it to look as good as possible, but we don't want to waste texels for light maps on areas that don't matter.
For some games, it's quite typical thing. You may be doing sometime low resolution in areas which will never have directional light, where you don't see shadows. But with stationary light, it's not that visible. But if you have to go full static for performance reason, it's quite important. So you really maybe have high resolution where you have your line between sun and shadow. But it's more old school thing. But sometimes you really have to do that, and it was that case. So if we go maybe to for maybe Halloween lighting, which was more close to traditional.
Let's see. Let's turn off winter. And so we basically set this up as lighting scenarios. And one of the first steps in doing that is like you sort of like build out your levels geometry, and you have your streaming maps and everything. We would break those up spatially, saying like, okay, this space is one map, this space is another map, and then we would have one map that basically contains all of our lighting, and then another map that contains all of our VFX. And that allows, for one, artists to work on the level, levels geometry, while a lighting artist works on the lighting artist works on like the lighting, right?
And you can make multiple levels to preview different possible things and compare between them and find really one you like. Another good thing, you can actually have some geometry saved and stored in the same lighting scenario map, which will be loaded when you want to load specifically a specific lighting scenario. So you can add, let's say, blueprint, which will modify some parameters in your map, like some material parameters. Like we can make like water here a bit more orange, and for the winter map, we change ambient occlusion color to be white to mimic snow. So it's really flexible thing. You can add like even like things like candles here and all these pumpkin heads. They all just added with the lighting scenario map. So it doesn't really mean it's only lighting inside of this map. You can add any content you want.
Yep.
It will save its lighting data and will apply lighting you have on other sublevels. So that's a really good way maybe to load sometime in between, like if you want to have multiple lighting stages for the same map.
So I think that about covers it for like sort of the static lighting baked using light maps and all that stuff. We could talk about sort of how the system is set up in Fortnite right now.
I think people would like that.
Yeah.
I think the lighting is awesome though, man. It's I think the one thing about a game is always you'll see the shadow of the lighting, and that always just it's super immersive, and I think that really you guys insane amount of talent.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there in games of like you want to express gameplay and have clarity, and then you also want to like convey emotion and like sense of scale and all that.
And you're
stuff.
doing this with music, and you're doing this with visuals, and
Oh,
you're doing
yeah,
this gameplay, and so it's definitely like an orchestral kind of thing that has to be done.
It's many dependencies. It's like one thing we probably should as well mention is buffer overview.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's useful, when you sort of start digging into the lighting. It's like you'll look through your different buffers and sort of make sure your materials are set up in a sort of neutral, even way. They don't have too much lighting baked in, so that when you do get to lighting,
You'll be a little more dynamic with them.
it'll be and it'll feel more natural.
Yeah.
So to give a quick overview of Fortnite's setup, it is fully dynamic, so no lighting is baked. The only thing that we bake is we store distance fields per meshes. That's just stored on a per mesh basis. That allows us to use ray trace distance field shadows on the directional light and distance field ambient occlusion. We have a very gameplay specific system set up for Fortnite. So, and it's a system that people could build on their own depending upon the needs of their game using blueprints or C++. In Fortnite, it's a mix of this C++ core system that's exposed through blueprints, and here in the world properties in a Fortnite map, we can sort of like tweak time of day to see how things are looking. And so the high-level explanation of how that's set up in Fortnite is we have this actor that references 4 times a day. There's nighttime, morning, noon, and afternoon. And for each one of those times of days, we have a ton of variables that blend between those different times a day. So we have 4 different post-process volumes.
Oh, wow.
We have
Sky.
we have 4. Yeah, it's like 4 different sky material instances, and so you basically set up a material instance for each time of day, and then the sky system looks at those variables and changes it on the material that it's actually using.
Does it gradually does that?
Yes.
Yes.
And designer
So you're
can
not going to go from like one
Yeah,
extreme to.
and designer can
exactly.
specify when it happens and how long it takes to blend between different cases, because they, for say, for one game mode they won't have more of one type of game.
Yep.
Then for another one, and it's really important for lighting artists to respect all these gameplay things, because for artists sometimes they're not visible,
Yep.
because artists usually spend time making art, but for the gameplay, it's really important to see things they want to see or design to be visible. So it always was kind of nice balance between like what you want to do and respecting gameplay,
Yep.
especially for multiplayer games.
Oh yeah, for sure. So you can tweak. So these clouds are just like a material instance where they sort of fake lighting in the shader, and so you can see how as the time of day changes, we change between a few different cloud locations, and we sort of like blend the light angle on them as well. And some of the fog, I think, is even built into the skybox so that it blends nicely
Yeah.
with
And
the exponential high fog.
it's the same material on Sky, just different versions, different instances.
Yep.
So then it's really simple for your blueprint just to blend between some scalar parameter, and it's really natural than how it looks. It will not blend one cloud to another one. It just will make transition between different parameters.
Gotcha.
Just to give people an idea of the number of variables. This is actually a pretty daunting system to,
It's really powerful.
it's very powerful, but it's a bit daunting to get in there and start tweaking the lighting, because you basically have these components over here. You have a post-process component, you can see for morning, day, evening, night, and you sort of like have every single setting you want to change for all of them. So you can like change your color grading, you change your depth of field, everything for all of these settings. And then on the class itself, we sort of dig into what's the skybox, fog, distance, diffuse, emissive. And so we're basically changing all of these values for every time of day. And, we'll basically, one thing that's like a good tool to use as a lighting artist, especially as you're tweaking, because even when it's static, not just when everything's fully dynamic, but there's tons of variables to change. So what we'll do is we'll set up camera shortcuts in the map. So like here, if, you set those up just by hitting like Control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you can recall them. And what we'll do is take screenshots from all of those locations. You sort of start digging in and changing all of your variables and tweaking something. Then you take more screenshots and you sort of like compare, like, okay, that's where I was, that's where I am now. I like that I did this. I still feel like I need more of this
Very
other
iterative.
thing. Yeah, and so, it helps us sort of keep track of not only how does it look over time as we're changing it, but because we set up multiple shortcuts in different locations, it helps us evaluate those changes across the map, because the maps can be very big.
Now, are you documenting what those changes are between iterations? So
Not usually.
if you need to go back, like you're like, well, that was just too much. I need to go back, and outside of restoring or.
No, it's more of one of those things.
It's just like you keep in your head and you just go
Yeah.
and go and
Okay.
it's coming with time.
Does that ever bit you in the butt?
At the times where you're like, I changed something to a negative extent, that's where I've gone in, because it's a blueprint, you can
Right.
go in there and like diff it against the depot.
That's
and so
fair.
you'll sort of see like, okay, I changed this variable, this variable, this variable. It was probably, sort of track it down from there.
Gotcha. So a little bit of footwork, but
yeah,
well,
for
not
s-
too much.
But for sure, there's times where you'll sort of go down a
Yeah.
path and be like,
But you may have moments when you're happy with night and want to fix morning, and it's become tricky.
yeah. I mean, that's sort of the problem. I'm sure Anton can talk about this, where like, because there's only 4 discrete times a day, you sort of get these in-between moments where it's a bit unpredictable what the lighting would look like. So you have to sort of balance.
Because you're in between two static numbers, effectively.
Yeah, I think, in theory, you could sort of build a system where you have curves that drive these things, and you could sort of change the rate at which things
Through
are
timing,
altered.
yeah.
But, right now we currently just blend everything uniformly.
And it works.
It
It's
does.
beautiful.
It works pretty nicely. It's just mixing colors pretty nice. I got experience with some dynamic systems before, and this one pretty much the best. So
Right.
even it's just mostly blueprints. So it's
Yeah.
like blueprints giving you really power of making things which previously you need for the programmer to do.
So it puts the power back in your...
Yes, and to prototype
to do
something,
that.
you don't need to make something super complicated. You just can make maybe animate only your skylight color or like your environment,
Right.
just directly in Blueprint. So you don't really have to make like 4 different presets. It's just really different way of making things. Probably are making presets better. It's many ways. Like it's not really telling you this is the only way. There's unlimited ways how you make things in Unreal. It's super flexible engine. Just try different. Don't afraid. You can't really make something wrong. Well, you can, but you can fix it and make better.
That's version control is important for a reason.
Yes.
One of the other things that we used, both in Paragon and in Fortnite, is we have our lighting. In Paragon, we used a level blueprint to do this. In Fortnite, we use this time of day blueprint to do it. We'll sort of inject colors and values into a parameter collection, and we'll be able to grab that on materials in the map. And so we can sort of, as an example, in Fortnite, we have sprays that people can spray on the wall.
Right.
Those are unlit. They're not actually lit by the scene. But what we do is we use that parameter collection to grab the time of day, grab the color of the light, and sort of just like tint that
As
unlit
it's spraying.
Yeah. It sort of like tints it based on wherever the sun is.
Oh, that's cool.
We can use that for a lot of different things. It could be,
Yeah, you can
pretty
share
powerful.
it for, let's say, maybe your sun color driven through the blueprint, and for material, which using light vector to make some nice halo around this sun.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I mean, that pretty much covers, sort of all the specific details around lighting, sort of like a dynamic game and how you could sort of build a system to blend between these values, as well as like, if you have a static lighting setup, sort of all the things you need to consider.
Sweet.
That's awesome. Lighting is, like I said, it's. I think it's made the atmosphere in a lot of games that I've played, and it's just
Yeah.
it changes the way that things feel.
Well, everything really dependent. Lighting is just one of things. It's just important that all your team really working together and trying to understand what makes things better.
Right.
Like as I was speaking before about using this overview game mode, which can let you information about how your specular looks, normal map roughness. So you can find if some asset maybe has incorrect roughness or something that's not really looking nice, you may find that maybe just roughness is wrong or there's no specular or maybe something shiny. It's really good way to investigate your scene through this game mode, so you'll know definitely what things are going on.
Right.
And it's really give you that nice feedback so you can make your lighting even better if you have materials respond to lighting naturally as they should be. Because even if you do the stylized look like Fortnite, you still can respect real life things, and you can look on any modern animated films and they're all using physically correct rendering. So stylization doesn't mean you not respect some law of physics, because mostly we all used to see things in real life in some specific way, and if something wrong, you will notice it even you don't understand some nuances about lighting
It's an
or
uncanny
art.
valley for
Yes.
lighting. Yeah.
And it's like really like big thing with some games just really making lighting, which really making things really sell themselves.
Yeah. So it changes. I think it changes the way that we look at games a lot. So cool.
Sweet.
Awesome.
We're probably out of time for questions today because we have some spring UE4 Jam news. But if you do have questions, we'll collect those, and if you don't mind, toss them your way and hopefully get those answered either in the forum thread for the chat or that's probably the best place for it. But thank you all so much for coming and sharing your vast knowledge
Enlightening
around.
us?
Yeah.
Oh no, we're gonna get
got to
these
do that.
every week.
Yes. Yes.
And so before we toss, we're gonna show you all a trailer. Daniel Kaiser, if you're familiar with him, he's absolutely in love with this game. So it's called Backbone. It's a pixel art noir adventure.
amazing.
It's inspired by film noir and raccoons.
Right.
So take a look at this, and we'll be right back.
Are you coming home tonight? The time is passing by. When life is nearby, will I
You guys ready?
That's so awesome. Like that trailer is just,
Yeah.
it's spectacular.
No,
Wait,
it's an amazing game.
I think they want to talk about the tram though.
Maybe.
No?
We could just wait.
We just sit here silently. No, let's not do that.
Yeah. So before we announce the theme, we're going to go over some things. This is our first time we've jumped to itch.io. So if you're not on there, you'll need to be.
You got to go there.
That's where we're accepting our submissions.
Oh.
And we're trying it all out. A lot of folks have asked us to give it a shot, so
We're trying. We need somebody else to join
we're
right
giving
now
it a go. Why?
because we have 666
Okay.
participants. So somebody,
There could be more.
somebody go sign up quickly. We'll wait.
And, but yeah, we're really excited to, okay, well, they're saying it's the second time. That was not been to me.
In this era.
Sure. But we're really excited to see what you all are going to make. Really quickly, we want to give out a huge shout out to all of our amazing sponsors. We have our partner Intel on board that's supplying some sweet SSDs that are really fast.
Yeah.
Falcon has a beautiful...
Do we do this now?
Yeah,
Do we
well,
do
you can
this?
show it.
Do we?
So some lucky winner, one of our finalists, is going to be getting
Should
a
we?
backpack.
Yeah. Should we open it?
Yeah. That has a swanky 15-inch
It's
laptop.
kind of cool.
It's all right.
There's stuff about it.
It's pretty amazing, actually.
Go ahead.
So the guys over at Falcon are wonderful. They sent this laptop over, so we'll be raffling it away.
Dun,
Let's do it this way.
dun.
Da-da-da-da. It's really light. It's really powerful.
Super
And I'm
shiny.
super jelly of whoever gets to take this home.
There's other stuff in here too.
Yeah, there's you get like
There's
a
a shirt.
shirt and a
What
coffee
is
mug
there a cup?
and coffee.
Look, if you're thirsty,
Here, let me
your
put the
backpack comes equipped.
So Falcon goes all out. We're really excited to have them on board.
This backpack is
So that
amazing.
those will be they'll be raffled away to one of the finalist members. We also have love our folks over at Game Textures that have materials for you to download ahead of time or now. Houdini has signups for you. They can win a year license from them. Assembla is offering Perforce or repository access. If you need that, you still have a chance to email us at community@unrealengine.com, and I'll get you signed up there. Quixel's on board. They're offering some beautiful mega scans, access to Mixer, which will help make those textures and things more unique for you. So definitely, if nothing else, go play with it. Get your hands dirty and see what it's like. Panda Dev Studios has a couple, or marketplace sponsor, again, VEA Games. The folks at Soundly are offering access to their sound library for Jam participants. So if you need some audio effects and all that, they're excited to jump on board. There's a promo code there, Jenga FX, another FX studio. They're actually here in Raleigh.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I met him at one of our UE for me.
That's awesome.
Great dude. And again, huge shout out to CrowdForge, who helps all y'all make teams and brings people together.
It's the merging of peoples.
Oh man.
This is there's just it's awesome to see so many companies come together
Yeah.
for such an awesome thing
For you.
for the people.
Oh man. So as always, there's a little bit with being on itch. There's a 750 megabyte default cap. They're going to raise that for 1 gigabyte on the last day. So make sure your submission or your zip file is that size, or at least keep an eye on that in advance. They do have an additional tool that lets you upload. I don't know. The guy said he thought it was unlimited. It might be 2 gigabytes. If your file's that big, you probably have other things going on that you might
Lighting
want to check out.
optimizations, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Our special categories this time around, we have the Army of One for the best solo dev. We have the Tiny Award, so if you've got your
If you're
game,
under that 700 megs,
Yeah.
by a lot.
if it's under 100 megabytes zipped up, I was really impressed. You guys really knocked that out of the park in the Winter Jam. I was like, oh, maybe a handful of you will get it. There were so many entries. You guys are really good at what you do. And we're also doing our something reality. So if it's some kind of reality, augmented or alternate reality
Mixed,
or
virtual,
mixed,
whatever, yeah.
all those things.
All the
you
realities
be
except
put
our reality.
in that category. So, yeah, that's kind of the gist. We'll be posting official contest rules and all that to the forum thread once after this,
After this.
because it has a theme in it, and
Yeah, we don't want to do that
We
yet.
didn't want you to
I think we
know
just.
that
I think we want to go
yet.
offline and like make people think that we forgot, and then be like, "Oh, we forgot," and then come back online for the stream and do. No, like a
Maybe
commercial
not.
break. No, they do it in TV. It's awful.
Yeah, should we?
Yeah.
No?
Y'all are so mean.
No, we're not.
What? I mean, we said we announced at 3.
Oh, we just got a question. What is the theme? That's the question.
Does anybody have other questions we should do first?
People were asking a lot of questions. Yes, there is a charger for the laptop in the bag.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's there.
Important?
Yep.
Important notes?
It has a screen and some keys. And I think there was a USB port on the side of it. And
On the side?
yeah, a way to plug stuff in. So,
All right. Well, we've probably...
do we have
Oh.
drum roll music?
And the
2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Yep. Spring UE4 Jam theme is transformation.
Yay! I love that
Oh.
we put our hands up in the air and nobody
we're
can
like,
see us. We're
Yay! Nobody could see us. So yeah, go make cool games about transformation. If you are live streaming it, let us know. We'd love to like promote your streams. Also, if you haven't heard, Unreal Engine is now a game on Twitch, so everybody should be streaming to that. We're really excited for that development. Also, as mentioned on this screen here, hashtag UE4Jam. We want to see what
right
you're working
here.
on,
That's weird.
what kind of projects you're, or like progress of your projects over the course of the weekend. We'll be keeping an eye on Twitter and seeing all that good stuff. So really pumped. I love, this is always one of my
Yeah.
favorite times of the year.
It's
is
really
like
neat.
each jam.
I get to see it in action. Yeah.
And
So every one that I've done so far has been on itch. I don't know.
yeah, 100%.
100% record. So
But yeah, and we're going to let you go because I know you all are
we have
chomping at the bit.
one other thing to talk about.
Yeah, we
I
have
want
a
to talk
few
about
things. Okay.
a couple things. I want a huge shout out to the guys over at Kindred Kindred Games for that intro that we had. They did that 5-minute intro
Caption.
trailer for us. Thank you, caption. So it was spectacular. If anybody is interested in submitting one of those to us, we just asked that it stay within 5 minutes, do something Unreal Engine development, and send it over to us at community@unrealengine.com, and we'll try and incorporate it. We also need a PNG of your logo. Submitting it doesn't guarantee that we'll use it, obviously, but we want to make sure that we get good submissions and we want to be able to celebrate that work. And so great job to those. We have Estel Mist on board as well. So those guys are fantastic, and we want to help celebrate just the work that you guys are doing on Twitch. As Amanda mentioned, we're now a category on Twitch, so that's where we'll go to look and participate in some of those Twitch channels. And I know we have some future machinations for what we want to do with Twitch.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about those once we hash some of that stuff out. But yeah, this is awesome. I can't wait to see all of these games.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of them.
Yeah.
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 So
It's going to be a lot.
It'll be
Couple
fun.
other notes. You know, I've tossed the link to the survey. I know you all are probably scrambling, but let us know how we've been doing, what you'd like to see in future streams. And always check for your local UE4 meetups, meetup.com/pro/Unreal Engine. There's always lots of great events going on, and maybe in this case, you guys might be hanging out, jamming together on site. That'd be rad.
That'd be
so if
awesome.
you have pictures of that,
Yeah.
let us know. We want to
Yeah.
see it. And last but not least, submit your projects to the NVIDIA Edge program. I want to send you some top-of-the-line hardware, so
I'll
let me
send
know
you
what
my
you're working
project
on.
later.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
so- And if you're in San Francisco,
Next
Pocket-
week.
Yeah. Go
Monday.
hang out with Amanda.
Yeah, Monday we have a mixer 5 to 7.
San Francisco.
Hope to see you there. If
It'll be
not,
fun.
I'll leave you with Tim's beautiful face
I'll
next
be here
week.
next week by myself
Yeah.
with other people.
Be nice to him.
Is it by myself with other people?
Yeah.
So okay.
All
So,
right.
Go jam.
Crush it, guys. We'll
Right.
see you next week.
Take care, guys.
Bye.